The greatest wealth is to be content with little, said Plato. But what happens when the world confuses abundance with excess? Perhaps the challenge is not to earn more, but to need less. Because all wisdom begins when desire meets the limit of sufficiency. Plato lived in a time when wealth was a symbol of political power and social status. Even so, he chose to question the meaning of possession. For him, the true treasure of man was not found in gold, but in the order of the soul. What makes a man happy is not what he has, but what he is capable of being. This vision arises from his philosophy of inner harmony. When reason governs desire, moderation is born, and with it, freedom. Plato saw desire as a double force, necessary for living, dangerous if without measure. When we allow wanting to dominate being, we become slaves to what we seek. That is why he said, "There is no man poorer than the one full of desires." In Platonic thought, wealth is not a sum of possessions, but a state of balance. It is the result of a mind that knows how to distinguish what is essential from what is noise. And, in a way, all excess is a form of disorder, a distancing from inner truth. Thus, to be content with little is not renunciation. It is lucidity. It is to realize that sufficiency is not lack, but silent abundance. Nothing is more precious than a soul satisfied with itself, he wrote. Plato's philosophy reminds us, the measure of wealth is not how much we possess, but how much we are capable of not needing. Before organizing money, one must organize desire. Plato would say that the true budget begins within, in the soul, for it is there that the first scarcity is born, that of contentment. In his philosophy, he described man as an inner city. Each part, reason, emotion, and desire, seeks to rule. But when desire takes over the government, financial chaos is only a reflection of mental chaos. The just man is he in whom each part of the soul fulfills its role, he wrote in the Republic. That inner justice is also the foundation of financial health. Excessive consumption, anxiety for status, and the rush to become rich are symptoms of the same imbalance. Desire ruling without reason. In the language of modern economics, we might call this a deficit of purpose. To organize money without first ordering desires is like trying to balance a leaky boat. The water will keep coming in, even if the sails are changed. Plato believed that the philosopher is the one who turns his gaze inward, in search of clarity. Applied to finances, this gaze transforms the act of spending into an exercise of awareness. Each choice reveals a value, each purchase, a thought. And thus, money ceases to be merely a means, and becomes a mirror. The man who knows himself is richer than the one who possesses entire cities. This phrase, though ancient, expresses a modern principle. There is no financial freedom without self-knowledge. For it is not the size of one's income that defines peace of mind, but the coherence between what one earns, what one desires, and what one deems sufficient. In practice, financial self-knowledge is the beginning of every effective plan. Before spreadsheets comes discernment. Before goals comes the question, for what purpose? If the purpose is freedom, money is a means. If the purpose is status, money becomes a prison. Thus, when speaking of sufficiency, Plato does not invite us to renounce comfort, but to revise the meaning of abundance. He would remind us that wealth without measure is only poverty disguised as brilliance. And that true luxury is having time, serenity, and mastery over oneself. Discipline is the gold of the soul. A disciple of Plato might have said, and it is precisely that inner discipline which sustains outer balance. To plan money is, above all, an ethical exercise, because every expense is a decision about the kind of life we choose to sustain. And when we learn to spend consciously, the soul, that inner city, finally finds peace. It is not desire that is the problem, but what we do with it. We might summarize Plato's view of human nature in this way. For him, desire is like fire. It warms when controlled, it destroys when fed without measure. In the contemporary world, this fire burns in another form, comparison. To compare has become an almost automatic instinct. We compare salaries, houses, trips, investments, even what we call spiritual success. But, as Plato taught, no one is more enslaved than the one who believes himself free by following his desires. The modern market has understood this vulnerability with mathematical precision. It has created an economy based on the constant feeling of lack, the "I don't have enough" as the engine of growth. But what truly grows is the distance between what we have and what we think we should have. The Greek philosopher said that ignorance is the greatest evil of the soul, and perhaps today that ignorance manifests as unawareness of our own desire. We want, but do not know why. We buy, but do not know what we are trying to fill. Disordered desire is a disease of the soul, warned Plato, and modern economics seems to have turned this disease into a lifestyle. Every advertisement, every social network, every success metric creates a new form of scarcity. And the more desire multiplies, the further contentment drifts away. We live in a paradox: material abundance and inner poverty. The result is a society rich in resources and poor in serenity. For Plato, the antidote lies in the education of the soul, what he called paideia. To educate desire is not to suppress it, but to purify it, to transform the impulse to possess into the will to understand. In financial terms, this means redefining the meaning of wanting more. Not more things, but more clarity. Not more achievements, but more coherence. He who desires everything loses himself in everything. As if Plato described the anxious investor who changes strategy at every news, or the consumer who buys to forget the emptiness that consumption itself created. True scarcity, philosophy teaches, is not of money but of discernment. It is the absence of an inner criterion that protects us from external comparison. And without that criterion, any increase in income is merely fuel for new desires. The path to sufficiency is not to accumulate until one feels peace. It is to make peace to realize there is already enough. Plato would leave us a question that still echoes today. How many things would be useless if man learned to be content with what he has? When desire is educated, money ceases to be a battlefield and becomes a territory of balance. And comparison, that shadow of the ego, gives way to the serenity of one who knows that the essential can never be bought. Wealth consists much more in use than in possession, said Plato, and perhaps this is the most revolutionary idea for a time that confuses value with price. Platonic philosophy invites the essential question: why do we want what we want? Behind every financial goal lies an invisible ideal: safety, freedom, recognition, or peace. But when the ideal is forgotten, the goal becomes a race. And every blind race ends in exhaustion. Plato believed that the wise man is he whose actions reflect the order of the soul. In other words, when purpose guides desire, the result is harmony. When desire guides purpose, the result is confusion. This vision redefines what we call financial planning. To plan is not to draw a path toward accumulation, but toward alignment. Not to project future wealth, but to preserve present coherence. In the world of personal finance, goals are generally quantitative: how much to earn, invest, or save. But philosophy calls for qualitative goals: for what purpose to live, and in what manner. The first question moves the wallet, the second moves the soul. Plato said, "Good does not lie in the much, but in the enough." That is the foundation of sufficiency, the idea that there is a point where enough sustains freedom, not limits it. Imagine two people with different incomes. One spends little but lives aligned with what she values: time, silence, time with loved ones. The other earns much but always needs more to sustain her own standard. Who is freer? The answer, Plato would say, lies in the soul of the one who desires less, not in the account of the one who possesses more. The measure of a man is what he does with the power he has. Money, in that sense, is a form of power. It reveals whether we serve reason or desire. And every financial choice is, at its core, a moral choice, because it shows what we consider sufficient for a good life. The redefinition of wealth begins when we understand that value differs from price. Value is internal, price is external. Value is stable, price is volatile. Value belongs to us, price seduces us. When money begins to express values, and not replace them, it ceases to be an end and becomes an extension of character. At that point, investing, saving, and consuming become ethical acts, not merely economic ones. The soul is the true measure of all things, Plato reminded us. And until we measure success by serenity, we will continue to confuse abundance with haste, and prosperity with distraction. Wealth, then, is not how much we have, but how much of ourselves remains whole before what we have. When goals reflect values, money finds purpose. And in that encounter, true freedom is born. The first and greatest victory is to conquer oneself, wrote Plato, and perhaps no phrase better describes the relationship between time, money, and discipline. We live surrounded by stimuli demanding immediate response, notifications, urgencies, opportunities that never return. But the Greek philosopher would warn us, haste is a form of ignorance, because it prevents thought from maturing before action. In financial terms, this haste becomes impulsiveness, purposeless purchases, impatient investments, unreflective decisions. Plato believed that time is the field where character is revealed. The disciplined man is not the one who deprives himself, but the one who consciously chooses the right moment to act. The measure of a man is his ability to wait for the proper moment. And to wait, in the modern world, is a rare act of wisdom. Discipline, in Platonic philosophy, is not repression, it is pure freedom. It is the ability not to be dragged by every passing impulse. It is the mastery of the soul over the body, of reason over desire, of purpose over the instant. Likewise, in financial life, discipline means choosing what endures instead of what shines. What endures is what has value. This simple phrase contains a powerful principle. The essential is what withstands time, and time is the true evaluator of value. Applied to money, we understand that saving, investing, and planning are not about control, but about permanence. To save is to protect future time. To invest is to project continuity. To plan is to give shape to serenity. Plato saw the philosopher as one who contemplates eternal order and seeks to reproduce it in life. Thus should act those who wish to prosper wisely, to contemplate before acting, to understand before deciding, to order before accumulating. Because it is not the number of actions that produces results, it is their coherence. Discipline transforms time into an ally. Without it, time is an invisible thief, consuming resources, energy, and purpose. With it, time becomes a teacher, teaching, maturing, and revealing the essential. Nothing is more powerful than a well-directed habit. Repetition, when guided by reason, shapes financial character. And he who masters habit, masters destiny. Discipline, at its core, is love for order, and order is the visible form of wisdom. When time is lived with purpose and money is used with measure, the essential remains. And in the silence of that permanence, the soul finds rest. The greatest wealth is to be content with little, said Plato, but this phrase does not speak of poverty, it speaks of freedom. For the one who needs little is not the one who has less, but the one who is enough. The philosopher saw moderation as the point of balance between body and soul, between desire and reason. Temperance is the harmony of the soul. And harmony, in any dimension, financial, emotional, or spiritual, is born from clarity about what is sufficient. In today's world, where abundance of options produces scarcity of peace, sufficiency has become an act of silent rebellion. It is to resist the idea that more is always better. It is to choose enough, even when excess seems tempting. Platonic philosophy does not preach detachment from matter, but mastery over it. To have, for Plato, is legitimate, as long as having does not replace being. Material things must serve the soul, not govern it, and this is perhaps the most relevant lesson for an age in which possession has become identity. In the language of finance, sufficiency is the point where money fulfills its role, to serve life, not command it. It is when resources sustain values, and not the other way around. At that point, every expense expresses a purpose, every investment reflects a vision, and every reserve holds not only capital but serenity. Sufficiency is the opposite of deprivation. To deprive oneself is to live in lack. Sufficiency is to live in the center, between what is necessary and what is vain. It is to understand that the pleasure of a simple life lies not in limitation, but in clarity. Plato believed that justice in the soul mirrored the order of the cosmos. Likewise, sufficiency creates order in material life. It harmonizes wanting with being able, gain with purpose, time with desire. And it is that harmony that defines true prosperity. Simplicity is the greatest ornament of wisdom. Simplicity, in this sense, is not aesthetic, it is ethical. It is how we express respect for what we have and awareness of what we do not need. When being prevails over having, inner freedom is born, the one that depends on neither numbers, possessions, nor approval. It is the freedom to sleep peacefully, to choose lightly, to live without haste. Plato taught that the just man is he who lives in harmony with his own limit. And perhaps true wealth lies precisely there, in recognizing that the sufficient life is the only one that lacks nothing. Plato taught us that the greatest wealth is to be content with little. But this little is not scarcity, it is measure. It is the point where desire meets discernment, and time reconciles with serenity. We live believing that freedom is to have more options. But, in truth, freedom is to need less. Because when enough is enough, the world returns to its right size. Philosophy does not demand renunciation, it demands awareness. It does not condemn money, but questions servitude. And self-mastery, said Plato, is the victory no tyrant can steal. In practice, living with sufficiency is to spend with clarity, invest with purpose, and choose with serenity. It is to use money as an expression of values, not as compensation for emptiness. It is to understand that every purchase is a vote for the kind of life we choose to sustain. When wanting becomes light, time expands. And the mind, once captive to consumption, finds space for silence, that invisible good no currency can buy. Sufficiency is the beginning of freedom, not its limit. It is the point where abundance ceases to be quantity and becomes quality of presence. And perhaps that is why Plato said, "Nothing is richer than a soul satisfied with itself." Because in the moment when enough is enough, life, at last, is full. Wisdom does not end here, it merely changes its form. Watch the others chapters and discover how other philosophical ideas can transform your relationship with time, money, and purpose. Philosophy and finance, because to grow wealthy is, above all, an act of consciousness.